What brand is differentiation. Differentiation is about making sure you do not become a commodity. We did that for 16 years. We've been agency of the year for 6 times in the last 6 years. At this point where we stuck dynamite in our old business model, and I've seen it make a CEO cry. And I go, holy I didn't think that was possible. That's the power of real language. If I'm on a golf course somewhere, I would have made a wrong turn. 2 things are about to happen, and why I think the whole branding industry, the way you knew it, is dead. It's gone.
Hey everybody, what is up? My guest for today's podcast is none other than Brian Collins. The last time he was here, he talked about generative design, and those of you who have looked it up start to make this connection. Was Brian predicting the advancement of AI? Well, I don't know, but it seemed like he had a crystal ball. Well, in case you don't know who Brian is, he's a design luminary. He's considered a design master, and he's picked up multiple agencies of the year. So I'm super happy when Brian says, hey, let's have a conversation. I got to share with you what is new in my life, what I'm seeing. I just want to pull up my chair and listen at the feet of the master. Brian, welcome to the show.
Oh, guys, I'm at the feet of the other master, Chris. You know, 5 years ago when we had that discussion, that resonated. I was stopped in the streets of Lisbon by a designer who watches you. In London, the streets of New York. I am so pleased to see your conversation and the important issues that you're bringing into the dialogue around design and the future of design. Been so pleased to see your influence and the conversation you have expand like around the world. You know, and now you're traveling around the world too. So, and we met, I think it was in Cairo, right? Yeah, because you were speaking at that great design conference, and I was at Ben Kirk. And later I went with Tim Goodman, other members of my team. And so I can't thank you enough for that conversation 5 years ago. It's so good to see you again.
I want to ask our fans and our friends of this, because Brian has a very distinctive look. If you ever see this man in the street, stop him, say hello, be kind, be respectful of his time, but just let him know where you saw him so that we can continue this dialogue with people just like Brian. So Brian, I know that you've been in this game for a really long time. As the kids say, you're seasoned. You're not old, you're seasoned. You've seen lots of things. As such, I'm really curious as to the patterns that you're seeing and where we need to be, because you seem to be pretty good at predicting the future.
You know, it's interesting. Collins is going into its 17th year. When we started out, after I had left a pretty successful run as an executive at Ogilvy and Mather, I'd been there for 10 years and had worked at Foot Cone Belling, San Francisco, and Levi's, and before that, in the design division of Fallon McGilligan called the Duffy Design Group. And we worked on brands from Giorgio Armani to Porsche to Levi's to Amazon.com to Disney, and certainly at Ogilvy, at Ford Motor Company, IBM, Jaguar, Starwood Hotels, and certainly the Dove campaign for Real Beauty that my team worked on. You know, that was a pretty good run. And then when I met Leland Mashmeyer, my co-founder and my creative and business partner, we decided to start out. We were kind of a ragtag group of. I was looking for gifted misfits, and certainly Lee met that criteria. I met Lee, and I knew that it was time for me to start, my own design company. I was in my mid-40s, and I had a lot of energy, and I thought it made sense given what I saw for the future branding. And we kind of stumbled, along. Our premise from the beginning, we started out with, 2 laptops, 4 desks, and an idea that design wouldn't be what we make. Design is what we would make possible. That put the emphasis not on the artifacts, but on the outcome and on the action that designers could have on creating the future. In effect, what we were doing is designers are wizards. We're able to kind of rehearse the future before it arrives. And the way that we would say it is there's really no such thing as the future. What there are many futures all in competition with each other. And your job is to fight for the one future that you believe in. And then design is the bridge that helps you get to that future. And so we did that for 16 years. And it turns out we played that game pretty well. We've been agency of the year for either Ad Age or D&AD, 6 times in the last 6 years. And, bonkers. That was a pretty good run, and we established ourselves, and we proved out our philosophy that design is not what we make, but design would be what we make possible, placing our orientation around the outcomes. By the way, that didn't diminish craft because we're crazy. We're crazy driven about typography and color and form and illustration and visuality, but we were equally driven by strategy and business and growth. And so during COVID, we thought that that model had pretty much run its course, and the branding model, the way everybody was now dealing with it, with these crazy-ass case studies that people were pumping out almost once a month, that had run its course. And so we decided during COVID to change. I know that you had, everyone had challenges during COVID. I imagine, you did too, right?
Absolutely.
Those moments in your life where either things come to a crash or things are force you to re-examine things, those are really incredible moments where you kind of get lost in the woods and you have to say, okay, where do we go from here? Where do we get our bearings before we jump into the future? What we decided to do was to completely blow up the old business model, like completely. And in doing so, what we decided to do is reimagine basically the foundations of the business. What we did is we looked back at what we had done most successfully over the previous 16 years. Or at that time, 14, 15 years. And we tried to find out what the pattern was through anything that we've done that was incredibly or outsized success. We tried to find what that pattern was. And we determined, we doubled down on three things. The first was, design is not what it looks like. Design is what it does and how it behaves. And then what it looks like is a result of what it does and what it behaves. That was the first thing that we knew that made a big difference for us. The second thing is that brand is not visuality. Brand is not the typeface. Brand is not the color. Brand is not the logo. Brand is not the design system. Brand is not the interface, look and feel. What brand is differentiation. And differentiation is about change. And differentiation is about making sure you do not become a commodity. The third thing we realized is that companies, if they're not a step ahead of the culture, are going to be behind the culture. Therefore, companies always have to change. Therefore, companies always have to transform. We realized that the business that we were in wasn't the graphic design business, wasn't the communications business, wasn't the branding business. The business that we were actually in was in the transformation business and helping companies transform so they could build a better future that was a step ahead of the culture. Then we had a fourth realization coming out of it, which was our most successful case studies in terms of design were also our most successful case studies in terms of business. Like became very well known for our work with Spotify. It was celebrated as a great sort of creative and design achievement and branding achievement. It also helped Spotify take off. Last year, Fast Company did a pretty cool story about the 10-year-old design program that we had done that they were still using. And so that was a nice proof point. So what we looked at, in fact, was this, that business and finance is not that far away from art and design as people think. In fact, what finance does, its mission is to find the biggest areas of opportunity for a business to grow in. Where's the outsized opportunity? Finance will help you find that. And that is what's most viable. So artists are really good at finding what does the future look like. We're really good at anticipating what happens next. And then we're really good at creating it, which is what's most desirable. They're really closely related. So we realized we had to become fluent in a couple of different things. First, business transformation. Two, business itself. We were already fluent in the arts and design, so we've become fluent in the last 2 years in finance by bringing in people from McKinsey, by developing a really good working relationship with Blackstone, one of the most powerful organizations on the planet that deal with business building and brand building. So we realized that we had to break a lot of our preconceptions about what we thought was design and what wasn't. And we realize now that finance is design, business strategy is design, management consulting is design. And so that's required us to really rethink the business that we're in. Because, as Disney said, I can't top pigs with pigs. I can't continue to do the same thing and think we're going to get any place new. Then I'm going to talk to you about this because you understand this more than most people. Our focus was external. We had a great internal team. I'm very proud of that team, actually. That the team has gone on to lead the that team is now leading human interface design at Apple. Our chief, the creative lead at Landor was here. The creative lead at Wolf Owens. Like my people, or our people, which is more accurate, who we hired years ago, are now at really marvelous positions, influence in the design conversation. And I couldn't be prouder than that. And so what we realized is that we were, for Collins, let's say 1.0, we were very externally focused. Case studies, speaking, that's how I met you. In speaking at a conference, I bumped into friends of mine speaking at conferences around the world. Paul Rudd would say in a project, I'm going to drop a name I worked with him like 20 years ago. He said, Brian, designers have to learn how to create a little hullabaloo about themselves. And so we had to create, we had to show people that we were in the game. And we were lucky. But now we realize that the external focus during COVID, we realized the focus is not as much external for us as it is internal. And the communities that we're building, as it turns out, after COVID, we launched this thing called Coffee House, which was just we opened our doors, we served free coffee and pastries and donuts and croissants and bagels. And the first afternoon we did it, 250 people showed up just to talk. Then we did it a couple months later. We brought a designer who we liked, and he spoke about his book. 300 people showed up. Then we decided to do it in Rio de Janeiro when we spoke at the Web Summit. Like 300 people showed up. And then we did it at the D&AD conference. We did it in partnership with Google, and 250 people show up. And all it is a bunch of people getting together talking about what the future might be. How are you doing? What are you learning? And we just did it in San Francisco during the Figma conference. What's going on? Turns out we have a community of people who want to talk to each other. And we could broker these interesting conversations. What we're trying to figure out is how do we have access to a remarkable community, designers, writers, animators, technologists, coders around the world, and how do we bring a conversation about the future to that community and to our colleagues? So that's one of the things we're really focusing on, is building our community of and I do mean the word community without, like, in all seriousness, like people who admire each other, stay in touch with each other, learn from each other, share with each other, and are in constant conversation with each other. It turns out that is extraordinarily valuable to people right now, considering how much of the industry is turning upside down. And before you even get into conversations about how advertising agencies are now entering the brand conversation, and AI has already been here for 6 years, and now really starting to show its face. Those are the things we've been working on over the course of the last 2 years, and it's been we've had to blow everything up because we want to become something different and something new.
I'm really fascinated by this conversation about this 2.0 internal conversation, this community building. It speaks to my heart. I'm just crazy curious about how these conversations are structured. How do you facilitate this? I'm having a hard time imagining it. 200-300 people gather. How do you connect with each other? What do you talk about? What is the format? How do you do this, Brian?
Chris, we're making it up as we go along.
Okay.
But there's one thing about it that's true. We make sure that there's our principle. There's no strangers. It's just friends you haven't met yet. That's the first principle. And the second principle is everyone who comes in, we're keeping an eye on them. And if they feel left out or they feel uncomfortable, my colleagues of mine are so adept, and they love people and they're sociable. They keep an eye on people to make sure that they feel like they're part of that conversation. Because many designers are introverts. They want to be able to have a conversation, so they show up, but they don't quite know how to do that. We help facilitate that. We introduce people to people. We make sure people have something to drink, something to eat. Sometimes people are uncomfortable at first, so what I'll do, I'll walk up to them and I'll ask them who they are and where they are in their life, and there are any questions that they're dealing with, and they often tell me quickly. And then I'll go up to the library. We over 5,500 books here, and I'll go to the library and I'll pull a book off the shelf and I'll say, why don't you read this passage for the next 15 minutes and then tell me what you think? And I'll suddenly have a conversation with them, and they open right up. At the end of the first time we did this, because I would take I have library ladders on both sides of this place. I'd climb a library that I'd give somebody a book. And someone said it reminded them of going into Ollivander's wand shop in Diagon Alley when they wanted a wand, and I would climb up and I'd find them a book. And turns out we're pretty good at that. We found ways and protocols through food, through eating, through coffee, through sharing, to get people to sit down and hang out. And I couldn't get them out when the day was over at 6 o'clock. So it stayed to 7 and 8. We don't do that anymore because I had to go home. The notes that we got back from people the next day were incredible. No agenda. No, like, you have to do this. No pitches. Just people sitting around having coffee. And really good donuts.
So it was just you creating space and making sure the awkward introverts in the room had something to do, someone to talk to, and you would just meander throughout the crowd and just help people facilitate or participate in the conversation with them. That's what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, we all do, actually, because my two other colleagues are really good at this too, and other members of my team. I'm hyper-social when I need to be, but then I have to go away for a weekend. So, because people say, well, you're not an introvert. Oh my God, actually, I'm half an introvert and half an extrovert, which means I have to go and recharge. So I know what it's like to be an introvert, but I also know what it's like to be an extrovert. So I can use my extrovert abilities to introduce people to other people, and I can use my introvert part of myself to identify other people who may be uncomfortable in a social situation with 200 other creative people, and that's made a big difference for us. In fact, what we're doing, and I'm so glad we're doing it, you and I decided to take you up on your invitation 5 years ago to invite 20 people and have this conversation in Ireland.
It's happening, everybody. It's for real, and it's happening. I'm so excited for it.
And what you don't know, we're also doing the same kind of thing. We're doing it 2 months later in Bhutan.
What are you doing in Bhutan?
Going up to Tiger's Nest, the incredible monastery. So it turns out that these conversations are enormously productive for people. And we're inviting clients, we're inviting friends, we're inviting other colleagues, just as a chance to have a conversation about what does the future look like and how are we going to shape it. It's unburdened from any other agenda except for the conversation itself. So what we discovered was this unmet need for people to have really meaningful conversations about saying things that you didn't know you knew. Like, you had the best conversations, you go, I didn't realize that, and you're saying it. And in the process of talking, we end up creating narratives and stories that give meaning and give structure and kind of give an understanding to not only where we've been, but where we might be going. One of my favorite television shows to watch was Walt Disney Presents. And my favorite thing he ever did was when he talked about the creation of Disneyland. And imagine a CEO of a major media company today spending an entire hour episode talking about the design of any of the things that they did. And that's all Disney did for one of these episodes that I watched. But what Disney was particularly good at is driving a conversation through storytelling, film, design, animation, music, to help create worlds. And particularly, he was actually an incredible futurist. One of the things that Disney did I was inspired by in the 1950s, before NASA ever appeared, was he was fascinated by space technology, and particularly the potential adventure of man going to the moon. And so what he had to do is normalize it. And he had to make it feel that going to the moon and the kind of space technology that he was fascinated by was socialized. And so he creates in the center of Disneyland, I actually have a model of it here that people Disney actually made for him. I'm going to grab it. Hold on. This is the rocket that they put right in the middle of in Tomorrowland, like in the mid-1950s. And he branded it TWA. The TWA, the brand that we're familiar with, because brands are mentors of things to come. And he said, it's going to be inevitable. We're going to be going to the moon. So that conversation that he had back in the 1950s was so compelling that the Eisenhower White House called Walt Disney Studios on Monday morning and said, could you please send us that film? Because Disney did such a good job at creating a new conversation about going to the moon. I mean, that film, you can still check it out on YouTube. It's amazing. But there in the Walt Disney Studios, he created a vision and a story with music and animation. It was dramatic about man's next step into the future. That's the power of design and conversation to create new futures. And he pushed up against the tide of fear. It actually what he did is he took the distance from the Earth to the moon, and he said it wasn't empty space, it was a sea that you could travel. And in fact, in 50 years, TWA will be selling you tickets. So he made it not only desirable, he made it so desirable, we would say, he made it so irresistible, it became inevitable. So one of the things that we're trying to do in building our own conversations with our own communities is that we've discovered that these conversations are incredibly rich and they lead to other conversations. Have you read this?
I've not read that, but I'm a big fan of Frank Herbert's work.
And one of the things I'm really fascinated is the difference between the Harkonnens, power, control, scale, which was like, we're going to come in and take this over. We're going to run it. It's going to be ordered, and power, control, and scale is sort of the dominant driver of so much of what happens in a lot of American or global marketing and brand work. But contrast that with desert power, which is more organic, sensitive, responsive, anticipatory, reactive, potent, and in my mind, poetic. We went this year to the heart of the marketing industry. We went to Cannes. And Cannes, over the course of the last 15 years, has been hijacked by these giant pavilions they've taken over the entire seacoast, which used to be able to walk into and swim, has now been taken over these giant pavilions by technology companies, holding companies. They blast techno all day long, and people were tired of it. And I remember going to Cannes 20 years ago. That's where I would meet my heroes. It's been hijacked by all these massive brands and massive consulting firms and massive media companies and massive technology companies. Unless you have massive amounts of money, you're not in the conversation. So we decided to say, okay, we need to have a different kind of a conversation. We found out about this 1866 chateau. It was called a Chateau du Domaine, up in the hills of Cannes, about 12 minutes from the waterfront. You could walk in 12 minutes, easy, up in the hills, in a forest, an incredible 10-bedroom. I think the place had like 20 rooms. And it had gardens, and it had a pool, and it had backyards, and it had landscaping. And you walked into a giant, almost a 3-story gate that opened up. And we said, let's have a conversation here. And it will be free. People have to take their lanyards off. But we opened up the conversation. We had, basically, it was 4 days of conversation. We invited Scott Galloway. We invited Michael Casson, who's a very influential player in the media space. We invited Marcus Collins. We invited Cindy Gallup, who was the chair that year of judging Cannes. We invited Gene Batney from Disney. We invited Jackie Jantas, our client at Spotify. We invited basically everyone who we admired, and they all came. And we had lunch, and we had breakfast, and we had live music. And then we invited people to come stay with us, like Dre London, who produces Post Malone. And so we had really good access to really good music, and the conversation blew up. And we realized that could host a conversation in Cannes for free. We just invited people to come. And then we made all sorts of new relationships, built new conversations, and to the point where very, 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 very famous agency, a global agency, one Global Agency of the Year, called me up and they said, "What are you doing over there? We were going to go out to this very famous hotel about 15 minutes out of town. Can we come and have our celebration party at your house?" And so 70 of them show up on a Saturday, and we had their big, they won Agency of the Year or Global Network of the Year, and they had their big party at our house. That's just what we want to have happen. So we're figuring this out, but we recognize that there's this unmet need for a meaningful conversation that is not driven by any agenda except for curiosity.
I have to imagine, Brian, that is a very expensive endeavor. I don't know what it's like to rent a chateau or to host this and have your team there. So I have to ask this question without an agenda. What do you personally get out of it? What does Collins get out of it?
We meet amazing people who could come work with us. We meet amazing creative partners, either writers, animators, coders, architects, planners, finance people, venture capital people. Our agenda is to create a place where people can enjoy themselves. If something comes out of that, great. If a specific client comes out of that, great. If a specific client doesn't come out of that, great. It's just, we have a really good band tonight. We have really good appetizers, and we're going to serve a really good dinner. And if you want to swim all afternoon in the pool, come on over. It's literally that open-ended. Anything else than that starts to feel really insincere.
I have to ask this question then. People who put on these large-scale events or even a small summit or whatever it is, not on the scale of Cannes, but why is it they seem to underestimate the value of conversations and community? Because they seem to do wall-to-wall programming where it's just speaker after speaker. And I know this, 2 speakers in, your brain is fried. But yet here they are, 2 days, 3 days, parade of speakers. What is it that they're missing? Like, usually these things start out with good intentions. We want to invite a bunch of our friends together, people we admire, respect, love, and create a chance for one another to have conversations. But it winds up being just a parade of speakers. And then it then creates this thing for you where you feel like you need to do some anti-programming where, you know what, let's get away from the mass, the size of all of this stuff, and let's just slow it down and just no agendas, come in and have a conversation. And it definitely struck a chord because people are like asking to show up and then asking to use the space.
We're trying to do things that feel native to us. And the other thing we like about it is we are absolutely egalitarian about this. One of the things I've learned in these sponsored conversations, they want to talk to CEOs and CMOs, and you're missing the entire equation. It's not about exactly who we bring, it's about our intentionality to have interesting conversations. A celebrated leader of the international sort of marketing community came up to me on our second day, and she's from Scotland. And she bumped into two young designers who have a small design firm in Glasgow. And she said, what are they doing here? I'm like, I invited them. They're really talented. And they just won. I think they won a small gold like line or something. And they could have been thrilled, but I knew them. They said, could we come? I said, of course you could come. And she said, that doesn't happen at these things. The only people I ever meet at these things are senior vice presidents and other people. I'm like, yeah, isn't that boring? That's really boring. It wasn't about your position, your title, your prestige, your power. It was, do you have imagination? What's the quality of your thinking? What's the generosity of your spirit? And do you want to come and hang out with us and engage in conversation, not worry whether someone is a senior vice president of marketing or something? How boring. We make people, so when you walk around in Cannes, everyone has these lanyards, right? It has your name, it has your title, and has the brand that you're with. We make people take them off before they come in the gate. And that's really uncomfortable for some people. Like, I'm not going to take it off. Then you can't come in. Well, why? Because it's a garden party, and we want people to meet each other. And then what ends up happening at these things is everyone's looking at their titles instead of looking at people in the face. And I want to have this conversation. I don't want to have a conversation where you're constantly trying to figure out, who are you? And, oh, okay, all right. Oh, you're really interesting. Oh, you're not interesting. And that's changed a lot of the quality of the dialogue. And the other thing, too, is that, and you know this, your most interesting thoughts and your most interesting ideas aren't when you're sitting down to say, oh, I'm now going to have an interesting idea. The interesting conversations happen on the staircase, in the hallways, over a beer, standing at a bar. You suddenly bumped into someone and someone else you know suddenly comes in. So the epiphanies don't happen when you're listening to Scott Galloway, although they might. The epiphanies happen afterwards when you're talking to Scott Galloway, over a glass of wine, which is what we've encouraged people to do. And because we're not programming 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, we had a breakfast thing, we had a lunch thing, and we had an evening thing. That was it. And then people could stay all morning long, all afternoon, and then after the evening event, we had music, and people hung out and had food. And so there are basically 3 conversations during the day, and the rest of the time, people hung out at a 19th century chateau.
It sounds wonderful. Are you planning on doing this again next year?
We are. It's our place. Actually, we found out that other people were trying to find out if it was available for them, and they called us and said, all of a sudden, our place is becoming very popular. We just want to make sure you would like to do it next year. I'm like, yes, we are. So, yeah, we already booked it, and I think we have half our programming almost already done. I was shocked, Chris, by the response we got to counter-programming in informal, fun, relaxed mornings, afternoons, and evenings, free of any agenda, beside having a bunch of interesting people talk to one another.
What shocked you about this? I thought that was the intention.
It was. I didn't know that it would blow up on social media. I didn't know it would blow up on LinkedIn. I didn't know that we would be getting letters and notes from companies asking if we could do it again next year. We've got 2 people have called up and said, could we sponsor one of those conversations next year? I'm like, okay. Like really good companies that said, how do we get involved? I'm like, sponsor the event or sponsor a conversation, but there's no logos going up at this thing. None. It's just a lovely chateau, and good people having good conversations about how we transform the future.
I think the thing that shocked you is a testament to who you are, how you show up, your intentionality, your circle of friends, and how you want to curate experiences and setting some very minimal ground rules about, hey, no name tags. It's about conversations, and it's going to be a mix of diverse people in all different stages of the career. Your one criteria is like, do you have a good imagination? Do you have a generous spirit? And I really love that. And it's clear to me that everybody's looking for something that's less processed and manufactured.
And less over-designed. We have no banners that says, no logos that says event. It's a house. It was so interesting to me that people actually came up to me and asked me if it was my house. Because we had we only had one, the Collins logo was on the front door, and that was it. It was not overt. It was like showing up at someone's wonderful garden party. When they were incredibly interesting, people showed up. Like famous people showed up. We have to learn how to transform ourselves. And we couldn't do that unless we had the input and the insight from the community, the people that we work with. So we're going to continue to do this. And Collins will continue to be more about our community than our company. At this point where we stuck dynamite in our old business model, the branding industry is about to go through two things are about to happen, and why I think the old branding industry, the way you knew it, is dead. It's gone. The big case study thing you pump out every month, where that game has run its course, is one. There's an article on Monday in Ad Age about how the advertising agencies that are now getting in the game, almost all of them are getting in the brand and design game, all of them. When the advertising agency showed up, whatever model you had is dead, right? Because it's like, okay. And they're like, oh, there's something going over here. If it takes a while for advertising agencies to see what's going on, and they finally caught on to this, and they're now going to come in with story and resources and power, and they're going to try to hijack it.
Are they acquiring branding firms? Is that what they're doing?
They're acquiring branding firms, and they're starting their own. Even within the holding companies, where they're already branding firms like Wolf Owens and Omnicom, you all of a sudden you the big power players, the holding companies, advertising agencies, all want to get in the game. And then you also have now what's going to happen with the influence of AI and the ability for AI, very, very short order, it's already here, to create the kinds of images that were inconceivable even 2 years ago. And the unique ability to make images, like the value of good-looking image, will be replaced. So people who work in design are going to have to rethink the value they actually bring to the conversation when generative systems are going to be able to create pretty remarkable imagery, from animation to typography to packaging. I saw systems 6 years ago that I spoke about on your podcast that blew my mind 5 years ago. And the thing about AI, and I still hear designers and creative people talk about this, oh, it's really terrible. The AI you're looking at right now is the worst it will ever be. You're looking at the Model A of AI. We got for the Model A to the moon in 60 years. It's going to go twice as fast as that because the AI systems will be able to self-generate. And that's going to have a dramatic impact on the way that designers who are historically driven to create images, those images will be made by AI.
I want to follow up with these two things that you brought up. First, with the ad agencies and the holding companies, these powerful conglomerates that can spend all kinds of money in acquiring and doing things that now are going to, I think, potentially threaten the independent branding firm. How do you respond? What is your reaction to that? Do you have plans to sell your agency?
No, never. We have no interest in selling the agency at all. And I, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to advertising agency, I'd say welcome to the fight. Collins will never be sold. Why? There's no reason to sell the company. It's so funny to me. People say, well, we'll sell the company, and then you can then go off and do what you want to do. We're doing what we want to do. I'm doing what I want to do. I work with, almost 60 amazing creative people every day, and I work with some of the best clients and the best companies in the world. If I'm on a golf course somewhere in Florida with the view of a fake pond, I would have made a wrong turn somewhere. Like, what? We work really hard to get to a point where we love what we do. We love the people we work with. Why would we want to sell that? I don't understand. No. This is what we do. I'm a designer. This thing is a table. So you work. How do I say? You work at a holding company, you become a designer. And so it was interesting. I went back. We have a place in Woods Hole, a property of about 5 acres near the ocean. And about a mile and a half from the house is Buckminster Fuller's very, very first geodesic dome. And, what Buckminster Fuller said, don't worry about, destroying the old model. Make a new model that's more interesting. So, and that's what he did time and time and time again. And that, I pass that every day when I'm in Woods Hole. And so that's a reminder of me is don't worry about the past, create something new.
So the space in branding is going to get really crowded really soon, because you said the ad agencies are a little slow to get to it. Once they arrive, it means we've hit the tipping point. How do you reinvent yourself? You've blown up the old model. How do you reinvent yourself so that you're not in competition? You're a category of one.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like I'm not interested in being the best or better or the leader. I'm interested in being the only, right? And so that's where this is happening. So we're moving out of the branded conversation. I ought to say this. Each of these conversations encompass the conversation that came before, right? So as a kid, I started out drawing at an aunt of mine, and I loved drawing like packaging and posters. And she said, "You're a commercial artist." And my father introduced me to someone when I was 10 who gave me a book on the pushpin style, and he worked for Walter Gropius in Cambridge. And he said, "Here's a book that I just got in Paris." And it was about the book of the Pushpin Studios. He introduces me to the term graphic design. By the time I get to college, it's no longer called graphic design. It's called communication design. Then by the time I start practicing, it's no longer called communication design. It's called corporate identity. And then it's no longer called corporate identity. It's called branding. So each of these things, commercial art, graphic design, communication design, corporate identity, now branding design, now we're ready to make, for what we saw, is a new leap. And the new leap for us is in transformation design, which is the ability to imagine, create better and new futures that are enduring and differentiating with our clients. That's where we're going, because we had to differentiate ourselves. Because otherwise we're just playing the same, otherwise we're trying to chop pigs with pigs, trying to do, a better looking case study, a cooler use of generative typography. I can't play that. We will continue to do that work, and I'm very proud of that work, but we're now looking at getting involved with other kinds and larger kinds of things we're doing, like hosting these remarkable events in Cannes, going with you to Ireland, our trip to Bhutan, and then the space that we're building down on Cape Cod for our people and our clients. Where we can have conversations about how we build a better future. Those are transformative conversations, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like right now. The thing that got us here is not the thing that's going to get us there.
Well, I'm excited about where you take this idea, and you talked about the integration of different disciplines and the integration of finance as part of like what you're doing, because if you're going to make an impact on businesses and organizations on that level, I think you're bringing all the things that you need to be able to create that kind of transformation you're talking about.
Turns out that we developed a discipline in financial analysis that's informed by imagination and by deep competencies that has allowed us to go into have conversation with CEOs and chief financial officers and CMOs. That's quite remarkable. And literally realigning, working them to figure out where's the outsized opportunity for the business to grow, what's most viable. And that's a creative endeavor. It's backed up by data, it's backed up by analytics, and backed up by great discipline, and people who studied at McKinsey and have MBAs and went to Stanford and Harvard, and who are think very differently than I do. But it turns out the ability to imagine that future using finance rubs right up beside the ability to imagine the future as an artist. Artists are particularly good at trying to imagine what's over the horizon, what's around the corner. So are finance people. And so it's turned out that these disciplines are native to one another. And they're actually quite creative. Designers who say, the finance people, the finance people are as creative as you are. It's just a different discipline. And so by embracing that, that's opened up entirely new conversations for us. And so I will be able to carry on, and the designers of my team will be able to carry on the conversation about creativity, design, craft, communications, environments, culture, product, all the things we know how to create, design, engineer, and build. And then there are other members of my team who have MBAs and backgrounds in finance and management consulting. And they speak with great authority in areas that I don't. So we can be fluent. So we're carrying on two conversations. One, conversations about finance, growth, and relevance with the CEO and the CFO and the CMO, and with the chief creative officers, and in some cases, the chief marketing officers. We're having a conversation about creative relevance and creativity and building, differentiation through design and copy and film and animation. So we can carry on the craft conversation about design. We can carry on the craft conversation about finance. It turns out that they are two peas in a pot. Who knew?
It's the common language between the different creative disciplines, imagination and transformation, and that's the connecting point of the hub.
It's one of the hubs because in both
Yeah.
cases, what you have to do is try to anticipate where do we go next.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that through financial analysis and some imagination, but also by plotting and all the things that people who have left brain, can know how to do far better than I do. What's turned out is the finance people within our company and the creative people in our company have extraordinary affinity for one another. When I started to be first invited to go to Davos years ago, the World Economic Forum, as it turns out, I ended up becoming friends with political scientists, economists, and I didn't have to talk any of their language. They invited me to one year I was asked to moderate Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, because we found out that our commonality were great stories about not belonging. And so all of a sudden I'm having a conversation with Stiglitz about how people belong or they don't belong, which is the basis, basically, of everything that has to do with economics. Economics is often related to status. So you end up finding affinities with people who you think would be in the opposite part of the world than you are, and you end up finding that you're almost the same. There's a very celebrated political scientist who secretly told me he loves, famous around the world, he loves the Muppets. And so I made a Muppet of him for his birthday. He lost his mind. And now he uses it as his avatar. And this is a very responsible political scientist who loves the Muppets. Somehow we think people who work in finance or business, or management, they were kids too. They had imagined they're at home watching Lord of the Rings or Star Trek or Game of Thrones or gaming. And so the hard line that creative people often put between people who are business people and people who are creative people is nonsense.
I have a question for you. You're talking about these big ideas and things that feel, I think, for a smaller design firm, really far out of reach. Can you share a story with us about something that you've done recently that can ground the entire thing that you're talking about, these different disciplines working together to create this kind of massive transformation that creates a preferred future? Maybe it's a project you've worked on that you can share so that people can map it out. Because I think that's the beautiful thing about your brain, Brian, that you're a student of history, art, design. You're very much connected to culture. You're the most well-read designer I've ever met in my life. Yet you're also kind of, hey, what's the point size on that thing, and is the kerning correct for that? So you're able to bridge those two worlds. So can I ask you to bridge this big thinking to something grounded in design so that people who are listening can understand?
So there was a company that had been around for generations, based in the Midwest in California. And it was a wrench-turning, heating, air conditioning, pump water company. They were called Therma Holdings. And they were a collection of basically wrench-turning businesses that took care of air conditioning systems, heating systems, the incredibly powerful way that people use and spend and save energy. Turns out most of the problem in the world of carbon isn't from gasoline, it's from buildings. That's where all the carbon problems are coming from. The amount of energy that comes off buildings is most of the problem. And so Blackstone had made a massive investment in this company, and they realized that the company was growing, but it was a collection of these badly branded, basically incredibly adept wrench-turning heating and air conditioning companies, HVAC systems all around North America. And so they came to us and they said, we get all of these companies, what do we do? And they're all about, reducing energy. I'm like, no one's going to want a reduction story. No one's interested in a reduction story. Business want a maximize story. And so the team went, including, our teams of ours that would do portfolio analysis and finance analysis. We realized that what they're actually doing, they collectively were solving the carbon footprint problem because of what they knew how to do. And we said, really, through some research and through analysis and some time with their CEOs, that what they actually weren't doing wasn't reducing energy. They were maximizing building efficiency, they were what the world needs right now, but no one's going to listen to Thermal Holdings. Really? And they were a collection of these amazingly gifted companies all across North America. So we rebranded them. We called the company Legions, and the thing took off. We connected their core value, what they did, to a bigger story about maximizing efficiency of energy. And the thing blew up. We did a new logo. We did a new brand story. We redesigned the company conceptually from the inside out. and said, your new future is not wrench turning HVAC people. Your future is to maximize the use of energy across every building potentially in the world. And it turns out they did the first zero carb hospital. They did this they did the first zero carbon hospital, did the first zero carbon airport. And they were saying, hey, we've done these things. I'm like, that's what you do? They just didn't have the story, the right sensibility, and sort of the right narrative, and certainly the right branding in order to tell that story. They have, and the thing exploded. And you can check out their site. It's called legions.com, and they've been remarkably successful. That's a transformation story. I didn't once mention the word typeface or logo.
How deep into the engagement is it that you come upon the insight that this is the story we need to tell?
My favorite quote is from one of the most celebrated chief justices in the history of the United States. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, forever seek simplicity on the far side of complexity, which means you got to do your work, you got to do your research, you got to find out what the answer is, you got to see what the story is that is going to not only resonate with the marketplace, but more importantly, the thousands of people who are already running your business day to day, so it seems sincere and honest to them, and a big enough leap for the future that will capture the imagination of the marketplace you want to speak to. That doesn't happen in a week. That requires research, writing, leaps of imagination, alignment with the board, alignment with the people who are paying for it, aligning with the customers you already have, and an anticipation and alignment with the communities that you want to serve that don't know about you yet. That's a lot of work, but it's rewarding because then after you figure out your story is about maximizing the efficiency of energy, then all of a sudden you have a narrative that informs storytelling, photography, design, interaction design, environmental design, product design. Then your aesthetic form comes out of that new story. And you're having a conversation about values. One of the things that has been shocking to me, the designers still present this way, particularly when they work with brands. Ready? We have 3 ideas. Here's the one that's closest in. Here's the one that's furthest out. And here's the one in the middle. The problem is designers would teach this, to introduce ideas this way, because that's how they were taught to introduce them in design school. It's insane. It makes no sense. Because what ends up happening is everyone does Goldilocks. This is too hot. This is too soft. This is too, this is too cold. This is too hard. And everyone goes right to the middle. And therefore, the kind of leap that you could have made with your client vanishes. So we never present our work that way. We say your value is about efficiency, or your value is about speed, or your value was about reliability and reassurance, whatever those are. And knowing that those are 3 values that were important for the brand, then we lean into one over the other. And certainly in the case of Legions, it was to use their incredible their towering competence in engineering and efficiency. And we built the brand around that ambition. That's a different story. But once you have the story, you design to the story. Otherwise, you're just swinging, trying to second guess. Well, a CEO like this? I don't care if the CEO likes this. Honest to God. What I care about is, I have 3 values that are really paramount to the CEO for the future. Does this design answer and this strategy meet his value he wants to build? And if I believe it does, we've answered it. If he doesn't like the color, it's interesting, when you talk about values, you talk about a vision of the future, there's very little conversation with the CEO about whether or not he likes that shade of yellow. Those conversations vanish. They never happen because you're having a conversation about what the future is and which of the futures that you want to build. Designers ultimately rehearse the future before it arrives. That's our superpower. And when you want to transform the future, we're like wizards. We can imagine any potential future before they arrive. When you know how to do that, then you shouldn't say, this is the closest in, this is the furthest out. Say, we have 3 ways in the future. Which one is the most promising, and which path do you want to go?
I have a couple of follow-up questions for you. As you're combing through vast amounts of information, data, interviewing people, getting the stories, collecting it, what it is that you're talking about, what people don't understand is arriving at a simple truth is not easy. It's not easy at all. So how do you know with your team that you've arrived at that moment and now we're ready to talk about that as the essence of what it is that you're going to do, the essence of your story?
You've done your work. It'll feel like the last tumbler in the lock has opened up. And when you read it and it's read in the room, the hairs should go up in the back of your neck. You go like, there it is. That's the story. And the story has an emotional resonance. And then when you share it with somebody, it should explode in their imagination to say, I feel that, and I can build a future around that. When you do that and you read it to someone, and if we've done our work right and we spend a lot of time to make sure it's right, we will read this ambition in the room. We read it to a very celebrated CEO, a project we just did in redefining their brand. A member of my team, a chief strategy officer, Tammy Mize, read this to the CEO. And the CEO, he did this. He started crying. He grabbed a tissue paper and he said, I've never cried at a meeting. That's my ambition. That's the reason I started this company. That's the reason why we exist. And no one's ever put it into language. Somehow you went into my brain and you pulled it up. And all of a sudden, there it was. It was no longer a mystery. You put it into language, and people would say, there it is. You got emotional in the room. That will often, it's really weird. That happens more often than not with us. When we read that ambition to a CEO, particularly a founder, they will sometimes get emotional. Because if we've done our work right, we've uncovered the thing that makes their company meaningful.
As a younger person, I underestimated the power of language and words. I'm not that stupid anymore. Can you talk to us philosophically, intellectually about the potency of the words? When you find the right words in the correct sequence, it can unlock that very strong emotional response from this powerful CEO.
Words create worlds. The power of language to create and paint a picture of the future that is grounded in understanding of where the business has been, where it is, and where it needs to go. Language that identifies what is. Language that identifies what must be. Right? And then language that identifies what could be, like what is, what must be, what could be. In your articulation of a company's future, you hit those three things. And you help people to understand what future it is that they're fighting for. It opens up enormous wells of trust because people say, you've listened to me and you've heard me and you've given me a map that I never thought I would be able to get. And then you can go exploring. One of the reasons we're going to Ireland, Chris, and we're taking those people with us, is when I took that trip there with the poet David White, the power, for the first real time, I'm sad it happened to me so late in my life, but the real power of language to shape a future was suddenly present in the week that I spent with those poets in Ireland. It's one of the reasons we're going back there, is the power to craft something out of nothing. There's this quote that people in design use often that Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, right? You've heard that. But then you have to ask the next question, well, what's more important than imagination? What's more important than imagination is craft. Can you make it? Can you create it? Can you animate it? Can you ship it? Can you write it? And the craft of writing is actually more important than imagination itself. Imagination is easy. Everyone thinks it's like, particularly in some industries, they go, I've got a good idea. I wake up like you do. Like anyone who's listening to you right now, we have 100 good ideas hit us during the course of the day. You probably wake up with 50. It's not the person who has 50 good ideas. It's the person who has 50 good ideas and says, I'm going to do that one today, or I'm going to do that one this week. So the ability to build one of those ideas. The ideas are easy. They shake out of my sleeve in the morning when I wake up, just like you, just like anyone. It's not about the big idea. It's about the big craft. Can you make it real? And that's what language is about. Do you know the difference between the right word and the wrong word? Or as Mark Twain said, the difference between the right word and the wrong word is like the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And I've seen it in a room. I've seen it open up the head of a CEO, and I've seen it make a CEO cry. And I go, holy shit, I didn't think that was possible. That's the power of real language. The power of real language is not to go out and say, we're connected, and this is a human brand, and we're going to be bold and relevant and innovative. Kill me now. I mean, if I see these interchangeable brand decks, they're all the same. Everyone has bold, relevant, innovative. They're interchangeable. So the power of language to create not only meaning, but more importantly in terms of brand, differentiation. One of my favorite lines that we wrote a couple of years ago was, for KALW, the first public radio station, an NPR station in San Francisco. I mean, a giant billboard we put in the BART station, and at the bottom it says in our giant logo, KALW. And the headline says, on the left of your dial and everything else. Writing is actually, that's the other thing we probably do. Writing is our secret weapon. We have really, really good writers here.
Brian, when I do my workshops, I try and tell people my objective is to teach you something, but I don't know if I've done a good job until somebody here has a genuine emotional response. And I think I figure it out. People are wandering through life in these adult suits, but inside is a child who is misunderstood, is looking for meaning, and wants to be seen.
Yep.
And so I think when I know what that is and I say that to them, I give them permission, and I am looking into their soul and saying, this is what you've always wanted in your life. And when I say that,
Yep.
they burst into tears. I imagine something has happened when your team is presenting, or you, to the CEOs of these large corporations, when you say, these are your values, this is the story, and they spontaneously burst into tears. It's because I think some part of them has been waiting to be seen in that way, so profoundly, so deeply, and connected to the words, and you find the right words, that can happen.
I think it can happen. Like, it doesn't happen all the time. I don't want my CEOs to be nervous breakdowns and weeping through their hallways. That's the scene I don't want to say that I encourage. But it does mean that we hit an emotional chord. Brands and your decisions about a brand, if you get back to a brand conversation, all decisions that you make in your life are emotionally driven and then rationally justified. So you've got to find a way into the emotional story first. That's part of the brain that activates us. And then you can back it up with data and the facts. And that's where language can make a really profound difference. I'm not surprised in your sessions because I think many creative people are very close to the first things that they were creative about. I mean, I started drawing like everybody did when they're very young. And I drew through kindergarten, first grade. I draw until today. Creative people, I think, tend to be very close to their first genesis or the first spark of their creative endeavors. And so I think they feel more protective of it somehow. Whereas a lot of people who go on to finance, management, and I think we shortchange them when we say that there's not extraordinary creativity in every profession. So I'm not surprised that people have that kind of spontaneous reaction when you say that to them. The desire and the need to be seen and valued is also one of the values that's driving our community making here. And that's one of the things I think that's made a difference, is that we have no other agenda except to have you participate in any way you want.
If I'm a designer, a creative human,
yeah,
or a strategist or marketer or brander, and I come upon this point in our conversation, I said, you know what? I've overlooked the power of words. Are there any resources or things that you would point us to say, like, this is how you can be more intentional in your word choice, because words create worlds?
I would point you in the direction of my friend, the poet David White. And I'd point you in the direction of a book of his called Consolations. And he takes 52 words that are overlooked and common and often dismissed, and he breaks them apart and he makes you look at them in the same way. And that book is a really good beginning on understanding how the power of language is easily as important as the power of visuality. The thing about visuality that can be more powerful is something communicates before you understand it. But if you can understand it and you help people understand it through language, then you get two ideas working together. You have incredible visuality and very powerful language. Those are two creative disciplines. And when they work together, they're unstoppable.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I can't wait to hang out with you in person, to geek about the power of language and words, because I'm a latecomer to this myself. I'm just like a little kind of antsy just thinking about this trip that is happening in October.
Why antsy?
Not antsy in a bad way, like antsy, like I'm with great anticipation, like that nervous jitter, like a big day of fishing for me. I'm like, it's happening soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I'm just going to kind of surrender myself to the process, to this curated event or this multi-day event that you've planned.
We're going to the Book of Kells at Trinity College. We're going to go to visit some ancient architecture. We're going to go see a dance recital. We're going to some of the best cooking and the best food in Ireland. It'll be a really, really good trip. And I think the difference in the events that we're having, and maybe the difference between Collins 1.0 and maybe Collins, 2.0 is this, Chris, is consider Collins 1.0 a march, okay? We had a goal. We wanted to become good at what we did. We wanted to become well known for doing what we did. And so we hit that goal. We aimed for it. And a march is a very powerful song, a very powerful beat, because the purpose of a march is to get you from one part of the country to another part of the country. In some case, thousands of soldiers, that's what marches were, to get you across, in some cases, a very difficult landscape, right? And marches have a intention and they have a function. I think College 2.0 is a waltz. And the purpose of the waltz is the waltz. The purpose of the waltz is to listen to the music, engage with someone, and dance with everybody else. There's no purpose to a waltz except to enjoy it and to enjoy it with other people. And it has no agenda outside of itself except for doing it well. And there's no goal except for learning how to do it really, really well. So if the difference, I think, for 1.0 and 2 is the difference between a march and a waltz.
I love that metaphor. I'm kind of visualizing in my mind right now, and I feel like part of our conversation has been a waltz.
The metaphor march and waltz is something that I've been thinking about for the last few years. And then I rewatched Mary Poppins with my niece, and I heard the march. And then by the end, I'm like, that's the shift in the music. The character, Poppins introduces them to an idea that you can enjoy your life without being so prescriptive, that you take a look at what's around you. You take a look at the systems that you have around you. What's available to you? What is in your environment that you can turn into something magical? Or as we shared, maybe the difference between the Desert Power and the Harkonnens. How do you leverage the magic and optimize all the things that are around you to make something that's more like a waltz? Drop the march and waltz.
How did we as humans, as a society, think about ideas and experiences and then say, this is the word that will mean that, and we have to have the same shared meaning? And that trips me out a lot.
Well, it's hard because languages can sometimes be slippery. And the things that carry the most amount of meaning are often the areas, things that carry the most. So poetry is powerful because it points to and gives language to the things that are ineffable. When people say, I don't have the words for it, literally, they don't have the words for it because the emotions that are hitting them are hitting part of their brain that doesn't have language. And so what you end up having to do with language, it's like trying to find a black hole. You can never see the black hole. What you see is all the star systems and how light bends around it. You never see the black hole. You can only see the consequences of it. And that's what language is. And in many ways, that's what poetry is. Because trying to find the black hole by looking at all the things that are around it. And that's what good language does. It's able to articulate something that's hard to articulate by finding the pattern that resonates in a way, and you feel it and you sense it. And that's very hard to do. And you end up tripping over language because we don't have language for this stuff. But when you nail it, there it is. And you can see it and you can feel it.
I'm kind of tripping a little bit because I'm trying to remember all the things that we talked about last time, then checking in my mind, like, did we hit all those things?
We didn't.
And I think we didn't hit the dark stuff, but maybe that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah. I think it is a conversation for another day.
As always, Brian, I really appreciate your time, your generosity, and I think it won't be another 5 years, but we'll look back on this in 5 years and see how many of these things that you're talking about as a futurist, as a person who's really deeply connected to culture, who's super observant, the things that you talk about, we're going to see the ripples of in a few years and see how spot on you've been.
We'll see. It is, it's a dance and it's a bit of a waltz. So we're going to see how we adjust it. But what we realize now is the march that got us here is not the march that's going to get us to our next chapter.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brian.
I'm Brian Collins, and you're listening to The Future.